Hi, good evening. If ICE agents are here, wait after the remarks. I'm gonna sign books. You have to laugh or else it'd be over. Thank you for the invitation and for having me here to be part of this special evening. This is really a privilege. For more than 8 years now, since the New York Times published my essay, Coming Out as an Undocumented Immigrant, I've been daring this government, my government. I'm a product of public schools. I learned to read and write and think because of public libraries. To do something, detain me, they've done it once. Deport me, I don't know why they haven't deported me. I'm staying at the Hyatt Regency tonight. I've been traveling the country like a walking uncomfortable conversation, engaging Americans from all backgrounds, progressives and conservatives, not only in the East Coast and the West Coast, but in the South and the Midwest. I've done about 1,500 events in 49 states. All around the country, people ask me all the time, the number one question I get asked, whether it's Stephen Colbert or Bill Maher or a Tea Party member in Georgia, they ask me, why don't you just get legal? Isn't that incredible? The gap between how much the media talks about immigration and how little people understand the actual process of immigration, how it works, how it doesn't work, and how someone like me, with my resources, my resume, my privilege, even someone like me can't get legal. There's no line for me to get in the back of, aside from leaving the country and self-deporting and trying to come back after facing what's called a 10-year bar from the Philippines. That's something that Bill Clinton signed into law when he was president. Immigration has been a bipartisan mess. The only process for me to follow is to do that. There's no way for someone like me to get legal. And if I can't get legal, privileged that I am, how do you think other undocumented people can? So after asking me this question of why don't you just get legal, I asked each of them all across the country, how do you define American? I asked the question so much, I figured just, wear the t-shirt. I suppose I've been asking this question the moment I landed in this country. I actually landed at the Los Angeles International Airport as a 12-year-old from the Philippines. I spoke little English. I felt really lost and confused. Wondering where an Asian-looking guy with a Latino name, it doesn't get any more Latino than Jose Antonio Vargas. It's called Spanish colonialism. Fit in a country where people are black or white. Like, where do I fit in this black and white dynamic? I suppose I've been so obsessed with this question, how do you define American, when I was 16, I went to the DMV, like any 16-year-old, to get a driver's permit. The woman at the DMV looked at my green card, she flipped it twice, and she said, this is fake. Don't come back here again. I thought she was lying. I wanted to tell her, I'm not Mexican. This is not horrible. This is in 1997, and even then, even way back then, in 1997, I thought that illegal meant Mexican. I actually think we owe, the 66 million Latin people in this country, 33 million of whom are Mexican, I think we owe them an apology for having racialized this issue as much as we have. So then I got home, my grandfather was a security guard, my grandmother was a food server. Can we give a round of applause to all the food servers who have been helping us? So I guess my grandparents, their plan, since they couldn't get me here legally, they couldn't petition their grandkid, it's not a close enough of a relationship, and they couldn't bring my mom, she was already married, that tells you a lot about immigration policy. They thought, smuggle me here, and then I'd go through high school, and then after high school, I'd work at the flea market as a janitor when my grandfather's friend was working, and then I'd find a woman to marry, a US citizen, and poof, I'd become an American. Like Sandra Bullock in The Proposal. And then I told my grandfather, no, I'm gay. So that complicated that whole thing. And I told my grandfather, one lie was enough. I wasn't about to go lie to a woman just to get papers. So as a 16-year-old, I was this illegal person, this alien. That's what the media said. That's what the newspaper said. That's what the radio said. Movies, television shows. The salvation actually came from school. When I was a sophomore in high school, a few months after this happened, my English teacher, Mrs. Dewar, said I asked too many annoying questions. And she said, you should be a journalist. I have no idea what that was. I come from a family of farmers and security guards and nurses, Filipino nurses. Writers, we don't write. But I found out that when you become a journalist, you get a byline. So your name would be on the paper by Jose Antonio Vargas. So I thought, if I can't be here because I don't have the right papers, what if I'm on the paper? That was literally the only reason I became a journalist. You could say that since, 1997, more than 20 years now, I've been writing my way into America. As a writer, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as one of the country's 45 million immigrants, 11 million of whom are undocumented, 2 million of whom are here in California, subject to detention and deportation under the most anti-immigrant White House in modern U.S. history, I cannot think of a more important question right now than, how do you define American? But I don't need to tell you any of this. Along with immigrants and refugees, Muslim Americans have been asking this quintessential question in the post-9/11 America, and right now in Trump's America. The fact is, the history of African Americans and Native Americans, and the history of every group of people who has ever been denied full and equal protection of the law, who has had to question the inhumanity and injustice of certain laws, have consistently asked this question. I would argue that our very existence compels us to. Muslims and immigrants, and Muslims who are immigrants, share much in common. Too many of us spend our time telling people what we are not, rather than telling people who we are. So, against the flood of anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim narratives in mainstream media, not just on Fox News and Breitbart and conservative talk radio, but throughout what's considered the mainstream media, we must find liberation in our stories. Like MPAC, the nonprofit media organization I founded, Define American, uses the power of stories to humanize immigrants in America today. Our politics are so divisive, so partisan, that I would argue that only stories allow for complexity and nuance. At Define American, we work with writers, producers, and directors in Hollywood in portraying immigrants as people. Not as caricatures, not as stereotypes, but as people with agency and humanity. So far, we've consulted on more than 60 television shows and movies, working with writers and producers on shows like Grey's Anatomy, Roswell, Superstore. We also work with journalists. We monitor how immigration is covered, and we publish reports that influence news coverage. Most recently, we actually partnered with MIT, studying how the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today continue to use anti-immigrant groups like Center for Immigration Studies, FAIR, and Numbers USA as credible sources without telling their readers that these organizations have ties to white nationalism. We challenge the language that news organizations use. Why is it that in 2019, in the Trump era, the New York Times, our so-called newspaper of record, still use the word illegal to refer to immigrants? Let me be clear and precise about this. I am here illegally without authorization from the US government. When I fly out of the Long Beach airport tomorrow morning, I can get arrested and detained just by going through the TSA. But I, as a person, am not illegal because people cannot be illegal. And as a writer, having said that, I have to ask, what exactly is an anchor baby? When news organizations use chain migration in reporting about the refugees and migrants coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, should they also note the chain migration of the Irish, Italians, Germans, and Eastern Europeans who followed their relatives to America during the Ellis Island era? Before anybody asked anyone for papers and green cards and visas? Before everybody got to be, white? For us at Define American, storytelling serves as a correction, an intervention, a source of liberation from the lies that are told about us. Lies told at the White House, lies perpetuated through the halls of Congress, the lies making their way through city halls, in our schools, perhaps even our churches and our places of worship, and most definitely making their way through our communities. I've been thinking in the past 3 years of this Trump administration about freedom. Meaning, if I can't get freedom from the government, local, state, federal, then where do I get it from? I mentor a lot of DACA recipients. I don't know if you all know what DACA is. There's 700,000 young people in this country, and California is home to the largest proportion of DACA recipients in the country. I mentor quite a few of them. So I was talking to one of the kids I mentor, Arturo. He's actually a college student near a university here. His parents are undocumented. They're farmers in the Central Valley. They're the ones that make sure you have strawberries in your salads. His DACA is about to expire, and he's studying to be a doctor. There's about 110 undocumented DACA medical students that we know of, and Arturo wants to be one of them. I met him on this closed Facebook group. And for the past few weeks now, because of the DACA case in the Supreme Court, he has been asking me, hey, Jose, if the DACA expires, should I still continue to fly? Because we're not supposed to be flying, at least according to our lawyers. And the lawyers in the room, I respect you, and thank you for telling us to be careful, but sometimes we gotta get on a plane, right? So he was telling me, hey, Jose, should I continue flying if the DACA expires? I met Arturo because I was coaching him how to pay taxes 4 years ago. Did you all know this? Undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes. I personally have paid so much taxes I should be a Republican. But I find it so interesting that the IRS seems to know where I am. The Social Security Administration knows where I am, but DHS doesn't seem to know. So I was telling Arturo, hey, you're here, you're a product of public schools, keep paying taxes. So he was telling me, should I fly? I have to keep telling him, as I tell every DACA recipient in this country, that our lives are worth more than pieces of papers that we don't have, and laws that people don't even understand and haven't even passed. I told him, make sure you talk to lawyers. I got him one. And make sure you know exactly what risks you're taking when you get on a plane. But then I told him, you gotta fly. One of my favorite writers, the essential Toni Morrison, said, if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is our America, and here, every day, all across this country, so many of us try to fly. Thank you for having me here this evening.